The Alley of Contradictions. The alley breathed fog like a dying animal. It curled between Victorian brick facades somewhere in Shoreditch, a narrow throat of London that daylight barely reached even at noon. Now, past midnight, it was a tunnel carved from shadow and dampness, the kind of place where history accumulated in layers, graffiti over graffiti, rust over paint, centuries of human passage compressed into crumbling mortar and slick cobblestone. Sodium light from a distant street lamp bled orange into the mist, catching in puddles that reflected nothing but their own murky surfaces. The air tasted of metal and rain-soaked brick, of oil and old stone, of a city that never stopped exhaling its own breath. The first figure materialized from the fog as if the alley had conjured him. Hooded, moving with the practiced silence of someone who had made an art of invisibility, he carried 2 canvas bags that clinked softly with the unmistakable sound of aerosol cans meeting. Banksy, though no one would ever confirm that name, no face would ever attach to it, set his burden down against the enormous wall that dominated the alley's eastern side. 40 feet high, 60 feet wide, a monument of decay, cracked plaster over Victorian brick, water-stained and tagged with a decade's worth of half-hearted scrawls, already peeling. The perfect canvas precisely because it was imperfect, wounded, real. He worked quickly, methodically, pulling stencils from the bags, complex cutouts that folded and unfolded like origami, each one precisely measured, edges sharp enough to draw blood. Spray cans emerged next, matte black, flat white, gunmetal gray, a palette of absence, of negative space, of statements rendered in the vocabulary of the street. He laid them in rows, arranged them like surgical instruments, then stepped back to study the wall in the fractured light. His breath made small clouds in the November cold. The hiss of aerosol broke the silence. Base layer first, a primer of white that transformed a section of wall into possibility. The sound echoed strangely in the narrow space, bouncing off brick and cobblestone, a mechanical whisper that seemed to wake something in the alley itself. Banksy's hand moved with the precision of a surgeon, laying down the foundation for images not yet revealed. The smell of paint thickened the air, acrid and chemical, mixing with the fog. You always begin with emptiness. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, carrying a slight Spanish accent, musical and rough at once. Banksy's hand stopped mid-stroke. He didn't turn, didn't startle. Street artists learned early not to react to unexpected sounds, but his shoulders tensed beneath the hoodie. Pablo Picasso stepped from the shadows at the alley's mouth as if he had always been there, as if the fog had simply shifted and revealed him, not the ancient, weathered icon of his final years, but Picasso in his prime, perhaps 40, perhaps ageless, wearing a striped sailor's shirt beneath a paint-spattered jacket, dark eyes burning with the kind of intensity that could reduce a model to tears, or transform a canvas into revolution. He carried a battered leather suitcase, the kind artists hauled across Europe in the days before budget airlines, and walked with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in history because he had already carved it with his own hands. Banksy finally turned. The hoodie concealed most of his face, but his posture spoke volumes, wary, defensive, and something else. Recognition, perhaps, or its opposite, the acknowledgement that recognition itself was a kind of prison. I begin with nothing, Banksy said quietly, his voice younger than expected, inflected with London and something more careful. So that something can speak. Picasso laughed, a bark of sound that scattered into the fog. He set down his suitcase and it opened with a click that seemed unnaturally loud. Inside, brushes of every size, tubes of paint like small bombs of color, palette knives that gleamed like weapons in the dim light. He selected a wide brush, tested its bristles against his palm, then chose tubes seemingly at random: cadmium red, cobalt blue, zinc white, ivory black, primary colors, the vocabulary of cubism, of revolution, of every painting that had shattered expectations and rebuilt them. Nothing, Picasso repeated, moving to the wall's left side, perhaps 20 feet from where Banksy stood. Nothing is a luxury only the anonymous can afford. He didn't wait for a response. His brush, loaded with violent red, struck the wall like a conductor's baton commanding an orchestra. The first stroke was a curve that defied the wall's geometry, a line that seemed to move in 3 dimensions at once. Then blue, angular and sharp, intersecting the red in a way that created tension. Discord, a visual argument. Picasso painted the way other men breathed, necessarily, compulsively, as if stopping would mean death. For a moment, Banksy watched. Then, as if answering a challenge, he lifted his first stencil, a child's silhouette reaching upward, and placed it against the wall's right side. The spray can hissed. Black paint obscured the white primer, and when he pulled the stencil away, a figure emerged in negative space, defined by what surrounded it rather than what filled it, a ghost rendered in absence. The alley became a theater of contradictions. On the left, Picasso built his side of the wall with bold, aggressive confidence, each brushstroke a declaration. Geometric faces emerged, fractured, multiplied, seeing from angles that shouldn't exist. A woman's profile split into planes, her eye simultaneously front-facing and sideways, her mouth a slash of crimson that might have been speaking or screaming. Colors collided, yellow against purple, orange bleeding into green, each hue vibrant enough to burn. He worked with the speed of someone who had painted 10,000 canvases and would paint 10,000 more, muscle memory guiding his hand through shapes that existed in his mind before they manifested on brick. The smell of oil paint joined the aerosol's chemical bite, linseed and pigment, the ancient aroma of studios and masterpieces, mixing with the modern scent of compressed gas and synthetic color. Picasso stepped back, squinted, then lunged forward to add a line of white that transformed everything around it. He painted standing on a wooden crate he'd produced from nowhere, painted crouching low, painted with his whole body engaged in the act of creation. On the right, Banksy constructed his statement with the patience of a watchmaker. Each stencil went up, each spray precisely controlled, building layers, a figure in a gas mask, flowers blooming from a gun barrel, a child releasing a heart-shaped balloon that seemed to float off the wall's surface. But unlike his usual work, sharp, finished, clean, here he began to blur the edges intentionally, let the paint drift beyond the stencil's boundaries, created shadows that shouldn't exist, that turned his two-dimensional images into something more dimensional, more uncertain. As if responding to the three-dimensional chaos erupting to his left, he began to deconstruct his own method. They worked in silence for an hour, perhaps two. Time became elastic in the alley, marked only by the accumulation of image, the transformation of blank wall into declaration. The fog thickened, then thinned, then thickened again. Somewhere distant, a siren wailed and faded. Water dripped from a broken gutter, a metronomic pulse that neither artist noticed. Their territories began to encroach. Picasso's geometric chaos spread rightward, bold colors creeping past the wall's midpoint. A fragmented hand reached across the invisible boundary, fingers rendered in impossible angles, grasping toward Banksy's side. The younger artist didn't protest. Instead, he sent his own imagery leftward, a stenciled dove, wings spread, flying directly into Picasso's cubist storm. Where they met, something unexpected happened. The dove's wings fractured into geometric planes, became part of Picasso's vocabulary while maintaining their stenciled origin. The collision created dialogue. Art must shock the soul, Picasso said without stopping his work, adding a slash of crimson that might have been blood or wine, or simply red in its purest form. It must reach inside the chest and squeeze the heart until the viewer cannot breathe, until they must look away, and yet cannot. Banksy added another stencil, rats his signature, but here oversized, menacing, crawling toward the mural's center. Art must wake the street, he replied, voice nearly lost beneath the aerosol's hiss. It must interrupt the commute, the routine, the agreement we all made to stop seeing what's in front of us. No galleries, no tickets, no gatekeepers deciding who gets to look. Gatekeepers. Picasso laughed again, that harsh bark. The galleries came to me, museums begged, and still, he stepped back, brush dripping blue onto the cobblestones. Still they didn't understand. They hung my paintings and called them beautiful when I painted them to be weapons. They bought the grenades and diffused them, mounted them on walls as decorations. So you took their money. It wasn't quite a question. I took everything. Picasso loaded his brush with black, began outlining a face that seemed to scream silently, mouth open in a geometric howl. I took their money, their praise, their worship. I let them build the prison of fame around me, and from inside it, I painted whatever I wanted. They couldn't stop me. They could only watch and call me genius, even when I painted their own obsolescence. Banksy was silent for a long moment, adding a stenciled crown, tilted, falling to one of his figures. And yet here you are, he said finally, in an alley, in the dark, painting something no one will pay for, that you'll never sign. "Here I am," Picasso agreed, and something in his voice softened. 60 years after they buried me, painting with a man who refuses to exist. Perhaps we're both ghosts, no? The mural grew, consuming the wall, transforming decay into statement. Where Picasso's cubist figures fragmented reality, Banksy's stencils reassembled it into pointed commentary. A woman carrying shopping bags walked through a geometric landscape where nothing made spatial sense, yet she remained recognizable, human, burdened. A businessman in a suit dissolved into angular planes, while rats, those eternal survivors, remained stubbornly two-dimensional, refusing to be fractured. Color exploded from Picasso's side and slowly infected Banksy's monochrome territory. Reds crept into the businessman's tie, blues pooled beneath the woman's feet, creating shadows that belonged to both vocabularies and neither. The center of the wall became a no-man's land, where their styles didn't just meet but merged. Banksy's sharp-edged stencils began to curve, to fragment, to see from multiple angles. Picasso's brushstrokes grew flatter, more graphic, incorporating the language of the street. A face emerged there. Impossible to say who painted it, neither cubist nor stencil, but something between. Eyes that looked forward and sideways, a mouth that was both scream and whisper, hands reaching up in protest or prayer or perhaps simply reaching. The face belonged to everyone and no one, could have been any person from any century, trapped in the wall and desperately trying to break free. "This," Banksy said, stepping back to look at what they'd created, "no one will believe." "No one believed Guernica either," Picasso replied, adding a final touch. A flower, rendered in perfect traditional style, growing from the center face's mouth, absurd and beautiful and defiant. "They said I couldn't paint realistically anymore, that I'd forgotten how. So I painted a horse screaming at the sky, and everyone who saw it wept. What they believe doesn't matter, only what they feel. But they'll want to know who did this." Banksy's voice carried something, not quite worry, perhaps anticipation. "They'll want attribution, authentication, a story to sell. Let them want." Picasso cleaned his brush on a rag, then tossed the rag aside. It landed on the cobblestones like a surrendered flag, stained with the entire spectrum. "You've built a career on not giving them what they want, on making them guess, question, doubt their own eyes. I spent a lifetime giving them too much, overwhelming them until they couldn't process it all. Different methods, same war." The mural was nearly complete now, 40 feet of visual conversation between two eras, two philosophies, two ways of seeing the world, and refusing to accept it as presented. The enormous wall had become a living thing, seemed to pulse with its own energy in the fog-diffused light. Human figures, some cubist, some stenciled, some both, climbed across it in a procession that might have been fleeing or pursuing, celebrating or mourning. Faces multiplied and merged, colors shouted and whispered. The political and the aesthetic waged their eternal argument in paint and spray and the texture of ancient brick, showing through both. At the top of the wall, they met one final time. Picasso climbed his crate, brush loaded with gold, a color he rarely used, too precious, too celebratory. Banksy stood on a milk crate he'd found in the alley, spray can ready. They looked at each other across the mural's peak, across the decades and philosophies that separated them, across the divide between legacy and anonymity. "A bird?" Picasso suggested. "A bomb," Banksy countered. "Both." They painted simultaneously. Picasso's brushstrokes created wings that fragmented into geometric feathers, impossible angles that still somehow captured flight. Banksy's spray painted the body, sleek, dangerous, lethal. Where they met, the bomb bird became something else, both weapon and freedom, both threat and hope, rising from the chaos below, with wings that refused to conform to physics, and a body built for destruction. Whether it was ascending or falling, no viewer would ever agree. Dawn began to threaten the eastern sky, turning the fog from black to gray. The mural was finished. They both knew it with the certainty that only artists understand, that moment when one more mark would ruin everything, when the work has said all it can say and must be released into the world. Picasso packed his brushes carefully, tubes of paint still half full returned to the battered suitcase. He moved slowly now, as if the night's work had finally exhausted him, or as if he was reluctant to leave. "You know," he said, clicking the suitcase shut, "Brock and I invented cubism together, but history remembers only me. Not because I was better, but because I wanted to be remembered, insisted on it, demanded it. He was content to paint. I needed to be immortal." "And are you?" Banksy was gathering his stencils, folding them carefully, returning spray cans to bags. Immortal? I'm here, aren't I? Picasso smiled, and in that moment he looked ancient, looked young, looked like every age at once. Painting in an alley with a ghost, creating something we'll both abandon. If that's not immortality, it's at least interesting. They'll try to remove it, Banksy said. City council, property owners, someone will claim offense or copyright or simple inconvenience. They'll try. Picasso picked up his suitcase. They always try. But something this size? This complex? They'll argue about it first, form committees, write op-eds. People will come to see it before it's gone, if it goes. And they'll take photographs, hundreds of photographs, thousands. It will exist in more places than this wall. That's the thing about images, no? Once seen, they live in the mind. You can't sandblast memory. They walked toward opposite ends of the alley. Picasso toward the east where dawn was breaking, Banksy toward the west where night still clung. At the threshold, each paused. The next time someone asks who did this, Banksy began. Tell them no one knows, Picasso interrupted. Tell them it appeared overnight, a collaboration between spirits, between eras, between opposing forces that somehow agreed for one night to stop arguing and start painting. Tell them anything except the truth, because the truth is too simple and too complicated at once. And what is the truth? Picasso's smile widened. That art doesn't care about truth, only about what truth feels like. Good night, phantom. Good night, ghost. The fog swallowed them both. By 7 a.m., when the first workers cut through the alley on their way to the tube station, the wall was dry. They stopped, stared, pulled out phones. Someone called a friend. Someone called a newspaper. By 8, a small crowd had gathered. By 9, the crowd had grown. People stood in silence, trying to parse what they were seeing, trying to determine where one style ended and another began, trying and failing to identify a signature, a tag, any mark of authorship. Looks like Banksy, someone said. Bits of it, someone else replied. But the color, the brushwork, that's something else, something older. Classical technique with street attitude. Street technique with classical ambition. Who painted it? No one knew. No one saw. The alley's few security cameras had coincidentally malfunctioned, or been disabled, or perhaps had simply looked away, granting the wall its moment of transformation in privacy. The building's owner, when contacted, claimed ignorance. The neighboring business owners heard nothing. It was as if the mural had manifested spontaneously, fully formed, a gift from the city itself. By afternoon, the art critics arrived with their theories. By evening, the news vans with their lights. Someone started a petition to preserve it. Someone else started a petition to remove it. The city council called an emergency meeting. Gallery owners made discreet inquiries about its possible sale, though selling a wall seemed complicated. A professor of art history stood in front of it for 3 hours, just looking, and later published a paper suggesting it was either an elaborate forgery, a masterful homage, or, and this was only speculation, purely theoretical, something impossible. The mural remained. Through rain that should have melted the spray paint but didn't, through cold that should have cracked the oil but couldn't, it became a destination. People altered their routes to pass it. Some brought flowers, laying them at the wall's base like offerings. Others brought their own spray cans, attempting to add to it, but something about the mural's completeness rejected addition. Every tag looked wrong, every addition diminished rather than enhanced. Eventually, people stopped trying. They simply came to look. In the center of the work, where cubist chaos and stenciled precision merged into something neither and both, the face stared out at viewers with its multiple eyes, its fractured perspective, its flower growing from its mouth. Different people saw different things in that face. Some saw themselves. Some saw the centuries' accumulated trauma. Some saw hope. Some saw despair. Everyone saw something that made them stop walking, stop talking, stop pretending they hadn't seen it. Above it all, the bomb bird rose or fell, weapon or freedom, threat or salvation, captured in the moment of transformation where destruction and creation are the same gesture, where art shocks the soul and wakes the street, where every certainty becomes question, and every question becomes painting. No one ever determined who created it. Banksy's representatives, when pressed, offered no comment. Picasso's estate pointed out the logical impossibility. Experts analyzed the brush strokes, the spray patterns, the mixture of techniques, and concluded only that it was either the work of a genius, or several geniuses, or possibly several geniuses working as one. The simplest explanation, that it was exactly what it appeared to be, a collaboration between impossibilities, was dismissed as romantic nonsense. Art historians historians preferred complicated theories involving unknown collectives, elaborate hoaxes, posthumous assistants working from secret sketches. But sometimes, late at night when fog rolled through the alley and the orange light caught in the puddles on the cobblestones, people swore they could smell oil paint and aerosol, linseed and metal, swore they heard voices, one Spanish-accented, one London-inflected, arguing and agreeing in the same breath about legacy and anonymity, fame and invisibility, the prison of recognition and the freedom of being forgotten. The mural remained, the mystery deepened, and in the alley where history accumulated in layers, where graffiti covered graffiti and rust ate paint and centuries compressed into crumbling mortar, one massive wall insisted that sometimes contradiction isn't a problem to solve, but a truth to embrace, that opposing forces can create rather than destroy, that art exists in the space between what was and what is, between name and namelessness, between the soul shocked and the street awakened. The wall had spoken, the city listened, and no one, absolutely no one, could say for certain what they'd heard.